Johnny Cash's dying brother Jack whispered something to him that should have brought comfort. Instead, their father's reaction created a wound that never healed. May 20th, 1944, Dyess, Arkansas. Johnny Cash was 12 years old, sitting by his 15-year-old brother Jack's deathbed, holding his hand and listening to words that should have brought peace to a devastated family. Instead, those words would trigger a moment of cruelty so profound that it would haunt Johnny Cash for the next 70 years, shaping every song he wrote, every choice he made, and every moment of self-doubt that would define the man in black's tortured relationship with God, family, and his own sense of worth. To understand what happened in that small bedroom in Arkansas, you need to understand who Jack Cash was to Johnny, and you need to understand the kind of father Ray Cash was. A hard man who had survived the Great Depression, the Arkansas cotton fields, and poverty so brutal that it had carved away every soft emotion except disappointment and blame. Jack Cash wasn't just Johnny's older brother. He was Johnny's hero, his protector, his moral compass, and his best friend rolled into one person who seemed too good for the harsh world they lived in. While Johnny was the wild child, always getting into trouble, always questioning authority, always pushing boundaries, Jack was the golden boy, responsible, religious, kind, and possessed of a maturity that made adults treat him more like a peer than a teenager. In the Cash household, Jack was the favorite son, and everyone knew it. Ray Cash, who rarely showed affection to any of his children, would light up when Jack walked into a room. Jack was going to be a preacher, Ray would tell anyone who would listen. Jack was going to make something of himself, going to lift the Cash family out of the cotton fields and into respectability. Johnny worshipped Jack with the complete devotion that only a younger brother can feel. Jack taught Johnny to fish, to hunt, to read the Bible, to treat people with dignity, regardless of their station in life. When Johnny got in trouble at school, which was often, Jack would defend him. When Johnny felt overwhelmed by their father's criticism, Jack would remind him that he was loved. When Johnny couldn't sleep because of nightmares or anxiety, Jack would tell him stories until Johnny drifted off to peaceful dreams. But Jack was more than just a protective older brother. He was Johnny's moral center. In a house where their father ruled through fear and their mother struggled just to keep the family fed, Jack was the one who taught Johnny about right and wrong, about the difference between justice and revenge, about the importance of standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Jack had plans, big plans. He was going to finish high school, go to seminary, become a minister, and spend his life helping people. He talked about building a church in Dyess, about bringing hope to families like theirs who had been beaten down by poverty and hardship. He talked about using his voice to speak for the voiceless, to comfort the afflicted, to make the world a little bit better than he found it. Johnny believed in Jack's dreams because Jack was the kind of person who made impossible things seem possible. If Jack said he was going to become a preacher, he would become a preacher. If Jack said he was going to build a church, he would build a church. If Jack said that God had a plan for both of them, then God had a plan for both of them. The morning of May 12th, 1944, started like any other Saturday in the Cash household. Johnny woke up early, excited because Jack had promised to take him fishing at the creek after Jack finished his chores. But Ray Cash had other plans. There was work to be done at the high school, where Ray worked as a maintenance supervisor, and he needed Jack to help him cut wood for a new set of bleachers. Jack didn't want to go. It was Saturday. He'd been working hard all week, and he'd promised Johnny they'd spend the day together. But more than that, Jack had a strange feeling about the work they were supposed to do. He'd mentioned to Johnny the night before that something didn't feel right about using the big table saw, that he'd been having dreams about accidents, about something going wrong. "Dad, maybe we should wait until Monday when the regular crew can help," Jack suggested over breakfast. Ray Cash's face darkened. "Jack, I need that wood cut today. The principal wants those bleachers ready for the graduation ceremony." "I know, Dad, but nothing. You'll do what you're told. I don't want to hear any more excuses." Johnny watched the exchange with the instinctive dread that children feel when they sense something terrible is about to happen. He wanted to speak up. to offer to help, to somehow change his father's mind. But at 12 years old, Johnny had no voice in family decisions. Jack looked at Johnny with an expression that seemed almost like an apology. "I'm sorry, JR. We'll have to go fishing tomorrow instead." "That's okay, Jack. We can go any time." Jack smiled, but his eyes were troubled. As he was leaving for work with their father, Jack turned back to Johnny one more time. "JR, you be good today. Help Mama with whatever she needs. And if something happens to me, remember that I love you, and remember everything I taught you about being a good man." Johnny laughed nervously. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Jack. You're too tough." Jack smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Just remember what I said, okay?" Those were the last words Jack Cash ever spoke to his younger brother while he was whole and healthy and alive. Around 2 p.m., Johnny was helping his mother Carrie in the garden when they heard Ray Cash's truck racing up the dirt road toward their house, the engine screaming, dust flying everywhere. Johnny looked up and saw his father behind the wheel, his face white with panic. And beside him, Jack, covered in blood, barely conscious. Johnny ran toward the truck, but his mother grabbed him and held him back. "What happened?" Carrie screamed. "The saw," Ray said, his voice shaking. "Jack got pulled into the table saw. We need to get him to the hospital." But there was no hospital in Dyess, and the nearest doctor was 40 miles away in Blytheville. In 1944, in rural Arkansas, 40 miles might as well have been 400. By the time they could get Jack medical attention, it might be too late. Jack had been nearly cut in half by the table saw. The blade had caught his shirt and pulled him into the spinning metal, slicing through his abdomen and chest with devastating efficiency. He was losing blood fast, drifting in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow and labored. They loaded Jack into the back of a neighbor's truck and began the race to Blytheville, with Johnny, his mother, and his father riding alongside, trying to keep Jack awake, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to will him to survive through the sheer force of their love and desperation. Jack was conscious during parts of the trip, and he kept trying to talk to Johnny, to say things that seemed important, even though speaking was obviously causing him tremendous pain. "JR," Jack whispered, "can you see the angels?" Johnny looked around the truck bed, confused. "What angels, Jack? They're all around us. Beautiful angels coming to take me home." Johnny's mother started crying. She knew what Jack's words meant, even if Johnny didn't fully understand. "Jack, don't say that. You're going to be fine. The doctor is going to fix you up and you'll be good as new." Jack smiled weakly. "JR, I'm not scared. The angels are so beautiful, and I can hear music, the most beautiful music I've ever heard." "Jack, please don't leave me," Johnny said, tears streaming down his 12-year-old face. "I'm not leaving you, JR. I'll always be with you, and someday, when it's your time, I'll be waiting for you. But until then, you have to be strong. You have to be good. You have to help people, just like we talked about." Jack reached out and took Johnny's hand. "Promise me something, JR. Anything, Jack. Anything. Promise me you'll remember that God loves you, even when it doesn't feel like it. Promise me you'll use your voice to help people, to sing about things that matter. And promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like you're not good enough." Johnny squeezed Jack's hand. "I promise, Jack. I promise all of that." Jack closed his eyes and seemed to drift away for a few minutes. Then he opened them one more time and looked directly at Johnny. "JR, I can see heaven. It's more beautiful than anything we ever imagined. And I can see Jesus, and he's smiling. He says to tell you that everything is going to be all right, that he has plans for you, big plans." Those were the last coherent words Jack Cash ever spoke. By the time they reached the hospital in Blytheville, Jack had lapsed into a coma from which he would never wake. For 8 days, the Cash family maintained a vigil at Jack's bedside. Johnny barely left his brother's side, talking to him constantly, reading him Bible verses, singing him the hymns that Jack had taught him. The doctors offered little hope. Jack's injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive. It was just a matter of time. On May 20th at 6:30 in the morning, Jack Cash died. Johnny was holding his hand when Jack took his last breath, and Johnny swore that at the exact moment Jack died, he felt a warmth, a presence, something that seemed to confirm that Jack's vision of angels had been real. Johnny was devastated, but he was also strangely comforted by Jack's final words, by the vision of heaven, by the promise that Jack would be waiting for him. In his 12-year-old mind, Johnny found peace in the idea that Jack was safe, that Jack was happy, that Jack was in a better place where there was no pain, no poverty, no disappointment. That peace lasted exactly as long as it took Ray Cash to speak. After the funeral, after the burial, after the neighbors had gone home and the casseroles had been eaten, Ray Cash sat Johnny down in their living room for a conversation that would poison the rest of Johnny's life. "JR," Ray said, his voice cold and steady, "I need to talk to you about what happened to Jack." Johnny nodded, expecting his father to offer comfort, to share in the grief, to talk about how much they both missed Jack. Instead, Ray Cash delivered a blow that was more devastating than anything Johnny had ever experienced. "JR, the reason Jack is dead is because he was working instead of playing. Jack died because he was responsible, because he was doing what he was supposed to do. Jack died because he was the good son." Johnny stared at his father, not understanding where this was going. "If you had been the kind of son Jack was, if you had been responsible enough to help with the work, Jack wouldn't have had to operate that saw by himself. If you had been a better brother, a better son, Jack would still be alive." The words hit Johnny like a physical blow. His father was blaming him for Jack's death. His father was saying that Jack died because Johnny was worthless, because Johnny was selfish, because Johnny wasn't good enough. "Dad, I wanted to help. I asked if I could come with you." "You asked, but you didn't insist. You were happy to let Jack do the dangerous work while you stayed home and played. You let your older brother take risks that should have been yours to take." Johnny felt like the world was spinning around him. "But Dad, Jack said he didn't want me to come. He said I was too young to work with the big saw." "Jack said that because he was protecting you, like always. Jack spent his whole life protecting you, making excuses for you, covering up for your mistakes. And now Jack is dead because he was too good, too responsible, too willing to do what you should have been doing." Johnny started crying, but Ray Cash wasn't finished. "JR, I want you to understand something. Jack was going to be somebody. Jack was going to make something of himself. Jack was going to make this family proud. You're not Jack. You'll never be Jack. And every day for the rest of your life, you're going to have to live with the knowledge that the wrong son died." Those words, "the wrong son died," hit Johnny like a sledgehammer to the chest. His father had just told him that he wished Johnny was dead instead of Jack. His father had just told him that Johnny's life was worth less than Jack's life. His father had just told him that Johnny was a disappointment, a failure, a burden, who had caused the death of the only person who had ever truly loved him. Johnny ran to his room and cried for hours, but the tears didn't wash away the poison that Ray Cash had injected into his soul. The damage was done, the wound was opened, and it would never, ever heal. For the next 70 years, until the day Johnny Cash died, he carried the weight of his father's words. Every success Johnny achieved was tainted by the knowledge that his father thought Jack would have achieved more. Every mistake Johnny made was proof that Ray Cash had been right. Johnny wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't the son who should have survived. When Johnny started performing music, he heard Ray's voice telling him that Jack would have been a better singer. When Johnny achieved fame, he heard Ray's voice telling him that Jack would have used fame more responsibly. When Johnny struggled with addiction, he heard Ray's voice telling him that Jack would never have been weak enough to need pills or alcohol. The cruel irony was that Jack's final words to Johnny had been words of love, encouragement, and faith. Jack had died believing in Johnny, trusting Johnny, seeing potential in Johnny that Johnny would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to. But Ray Cash had taken those beautiful final words and turned them into a weapon, a constant reminder of Johnny's inadequacy. Johnny's relationship with God was forever complicated by that day. On one hand, Jack's vision of heaven, of Jesus smiling, of angels coming to take him home, had planted a seed of faith that would grow throughout Johnny's life. On the other hand, Ray's interpretation of Jack's death as divine punishment for Johnny's failings created a toxic theology that made Johnny believe God loved him less than God had loved Jack. Johnny's relationship with success was poisoned by the same wound. Every achievement felt hollow because Johnny knew that Jack would have achieved more. Every award, every hit record, every sold-out concert was shadowed by the knowledge that Johnny was living a life that should have belonged to his more worthy brother. Johnny's struggles with addiction, with self-destructive behavior, with the darkness that would periodically consume him, all traced back to that moment in the living room when his father had told him that the wrong son died. Johnny spent decades trying to numb the pain of being unwanted, unloved, unworthy of the life he was living. But perhaps most tragically, Johnny's capacity for love was damaged by that wound. Even when June Carter convinced him that he was worthy of love, even when his children showed him unconditional devotion, even when millions of fans around the world celebrated his music and his message, Johnny could never fully believe that he deserved any of it. Deep down, he still heard Ray Cash's voice telling him that Jack would have been more deserving. The songs that made Johnny Cash famous, the darkness and pain that gave his music its power, the empathy for outcasts and prisoners and forgotten people, all of it flowed from the wound that Ray Cash had opened on May 20th, 1944. Johnny spent his career singing for people who felt unloved, unwanted, unworthy, because he understood exactly how that felt. Folsom Prison Blues, Hurt, The Man in Black. All of Johnny's most powerful songs were, in essence, conversations with the ghost of Jack Cash and the voice of Ray Cash. Johnny sang for prisoners because he felt like a prisoner of his own inadequacy. Johnny sang for the downtrodden because he felt downtrodden by his own father's rejection. Johnny wore black because he was in perpetual mourning for the brother he'd lost and the father's love he'd never had. In his later years, Johnny would sometimes talk about Jack in interviews, but he never revealed the full extent of his father's cruelty. He would talk about how much Jack had meant to him, how Jack's faith had influenced his own spirituality, how Jack's death had shaped his understanding of loss and grief. But Johnny never told the world that his father had blamed him for Jack's death, had told him he was the wrong son, had poisoned every moment of joy Johnny might have felt for the rest of his life. June Carter Cash, who knew Johnny better than anyone, understood that her husband's pain went deeper than his addiction, deeper than his professional struggles, deeper than any external conflict. June understood that Johnny was fighting a war with his own sense of worth, and she spent their entire marriage trying to convince him that he was loved, that he was valued, that he was worthy of happiness. Johnny carried something heavy his whole life, June said after Johnny's death. He carried the weight of being the brother who survived, and he never forgave himself for that. He never understood that surviving wasn't his fault, wasn't his choice, wasn't something to be ashamed of. When Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, his last words were reportedly about Jack. He told a nurse that he could see Jack waiting for him, that Jack looked just like he had when they were boys, that Jack was smiling and telling him it was time to come home. In death, Johnny finally found the peace that Jack's original words had been meant to provide. He finally understood that Jack had never blamed him, had never considered him unworthy, had never wished that their places were reversed. He finally heard Jack's words of love and encouragement without the poisonous filter of Ray Cash's cruelty. The tragedy of Johnny Cash's life wasn't that his brother died in a sawmill accident. The tragedy was that a father's moment of cruel blame turned a young boy's natural grief into a lifetime of undeserved shame. Jack Cash died believing in his younger brother's potential, but Ray Cash made sure that Johnny would spend 70 years believing he could never live up to it. Johnny Cash became the man in black because he spent his life in mourning, not just for Jack, but for the father's love he never received, for the sense of worth he never felt, for the peace that should have come from Jack's final, loving words. Those beautiful words of comfort, Jack's vision of heaven, his promise to wait for Johnny, his faith in Johnny's future, had been turned into instruments of torture by a father who chose to blame rather than comfort, to wound rather than heal, to divide rather than unite a family in grief. In the end, Johnny Cash's greatest song wasn't one he ever recorded. It was the 70-year lament of a boy who was told he was the wrong son, who believed it, and who spent the rest of his life trying to prove he was worthy of the brother's love that had never needed proving at all. Jack Cash died believing in Johnny. Ray Cash made sure Johnny would never believe in himself. And that wound, opened on a spring day in Arkansas in 1944, never healed.